-53- is the code for international calls to Cuba, and also the ordinal number of iodine in the periodic table of chemical elements. But just say this number in front of an Italian, and he will shudder. After all, at the beginning of the 2000s, the country was gripped by the 53 epidemic. According to economists' estimates, over 11 months, the residents of Italy spent about 23 billion euros on lotteries. More than 50 people were left without a roof over their heads. They pawned their homes to take out loans. One bank employee spent €1 million from clients' accounts. It all resembled some kind of mass madness. People lost valuable property, homes, cars, and demands, emerged to ban betting on this number. But since the lottery was state-run, it was actually in the state's interest for people to bet and lose. Even the authoritative Cardinal Antonelli from Florence tried to reason with his compatriots through television. He explained that gambling is a sin anyway, and such terrible excessiveness only exacerbates it further. But neither the church, nor officials, nor common sense could curb the mass madness. After all, national lotteries are a kind of habit at the state level. Italians became addicted to them back in the 16th century when such draws appeared, and they, of course, appealed to the naturally gambling people. Gambling, translated from French hazard, means risk, chance. And why is this phenomenon so important, well-known, significant? Because during times when we risk something, do something, adrenaline is released and dopamine is released. And it turns out to be such a positive hormonal reinforcement of the event that is happening now. And usually, under normal circumstances, it works for the better, right? We're running late somewhere, a little adrenaline kicks in, and we hurry. And then we succeed. We experience some kind of happiness. And so, on February 9th, 2005, the number 53 finally came up. But the happiness didn't last long. Yes, undoubtedly, people seemed to exhale. The winners received their monetary prize, and in total, the prize amount was 600 million euros. It seemed that the gambling obsession was over, but in its place came, as journalists wrote, the great Italian apathy. No one wanted to place bets. It seemed to lose all meaning. There's a sharp drop downward, a sense of emptiness. If it were a vessel of some kind, it's as if the bottom of the vessel opened and everything suddenly poured out. And conversely, the sympathetic stress system kicks in, and the body immediately falls into incredible stress. Like a swing. Snap. Italians in general are big fans of such emotional swings, and this is not a stereotype, but a characteristic of temperament, experts say. But they, more than any other nation, also turned out to be susceptible to the gambler's fallacy, or the Monte Carlo fallacy. This phenomenon is directly related to probability theory, where the player does not realize that each outcome in roulette or a lottery is completely independent of previous results. In other words, as mathematicians joke, numbers owe nothing to anyone. The Monte Carlo fallacy, based on a real case, occurred in 1913 when, in one of the Monte Carlo casinos, black came up 26 times in a row, and players bet on red, expecting that since black had come up so many times, now red must surely come up. It's clear that in reality, this conclusion is erroneous, because each time the probability of red or black coming up is the same 50%. What's most interesting, historians say, is that Italy was already obsessed with this effect. In 1941, the number 8 did not come up in 200 consecutive draws. And people noticed this and began to tirelessly bet money on it week after week. Of course, the scale of losses is incomparable to the 53 epidemic. But still, the country's residents were quite nervous, and even came up with a conspiracy theory that the ball with the coveted 8 was stolen by the leader of Italian fascists, Benito Mussolini. The viewpoint emerged that Benito Mussolini specifically removed the number 8 from the lottery drum, so that people would lose and thus finance the war that Italy entered in 1940. However, in 1941, on the 201st draw, the number 8 finally came up. Thus, It was revealed that Mussolini had not removed the ball from the drum, or, as supporters of the lottery theory reasoned, the Duce had collected enough funds, or perhaps he realized that a little more and popular anger would erupt. Due to the connection with Mussolini, or another drop on the emotional swing, Italians once again abandoned their favorite pastime. And for several years, the national lottery draws remained unsold. However, later, a lottery appeared in which no one wanted to participate at all. But they had to. In 1969, under the direction of U.S. President Richard Nixon, an unusual draw was held live on air. The winners did not receive a cash check, but the opportunity to go to war in Vietnam. Since 1963, the number of draftees in the U.S. Army had been excessive. This was related to the post-war baby boom. There were too many young men, but in 1964, the Vietnam War began. It consumed more and more resources. By 1968, there were already 500,000 American soldiers in Vietnam, and they suffered significant losses. Approximately 500 soldiers died each week, and the desire to join the Army decreased, while the Army's need for draftees, conversely, increased. So, instead of 10,000 soldiers per month, 30,000 soldiers per month were required. The mobilization campaign in the U.S. at that time truly failed. Americans did not understand the purpose of the conflict in Vietnam and avoided service in every possible way. According to popular wisdom, desperate times call for desperate measures. However, Richard Nixon's directive to turn a potentially one-way trip into entertainment was perceived by the public as outright mockery. After all, to make matters worse, this Russian roulette was conducted under highly questionable rules. Young men whose birth dates were drawn in the lottery were sent to the Army. For example, all 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, 5s. Up to 31 for January were packaged and placed in a reservoir. Here are all the January ones. Then a partition was placed, and all the February ones were added in the same way. Then they were thoroughly mixed, and again, with a partition, all of January and February were separated, March was added, and everything was mixed again. In the end, the January capsules were mixed 11 times, February ones 10 times, and so on, one less each time. The December capsules were mixed only once. Well, people saw some kind of trick in this. Political scientists still consider this recruitment method to be the most failed presidential initiative of Richard Nixon, as well as the Vietnam War in general. Dying or becoming disabled simply because of bad luck in a lottery seemed like a dubious idea to Americans. However, the rules were revised. The capsules were mixed more thoroughly, and the drum continued to spin until 1975, when the war ended. And along with it, the American bloody lottery went out of circulation.